Hey, everyone, and welcome to Market Dive. The podcast that kind of helps make sense of the financial world for, you professionals out there.
That's right.
You can also find us on our YouTube channel.
Oh, cool.
It's called Market Dive as well. And we're diving into something pretty fascinating today.
Oh, yeah.
It's how U.S. investor sentiment has gone from, like real doom and gloom back in the early 2020s
Oh, yeah.
to, well, something way more optimistic now.
For sure.
So we've got some great sources for this one. We're looking at data from top financial institutions like Vanguard. We've got some expert opinions from various market analysts. We're going to break it all down
Yeah.
so you can really understand, maybe where the market's heading.
Right.
So I'm ready to jump back in time to the early 2020s.
Okay.
Do you remember those days?
Oh, I remember them very well.
I think we all do.
Yeah, 2020.
It was a tough time.
Yeah, the COVID-19 pandemic, hitting us hard. The stock market just plummeting
Yeah.
at a record pace. Actually, the fastest we've ever seen global stock markets decline.
It was a wild ride.
It was.
And on top of the pandemic,
Yeah.
we had the oil price war just making things worse.
Mm-hmm.
We had, the social unrest from the George Floyd protests.
Right.
And even the first impeachment of President Trump.
Yeah, that was a lot.
There's just so much uncertainty everywhere.
Yeah, and all that uncertainty,
Yeah.
that led to a lot of pessimism among investors. But then as we moved into 2023, 2024,
Yeah.
things started to shift.
So how do we know what investors were actually feeling?
Right.
Can't exactly read their minds.
Well, we do have something kind of close.
Oh,
The Vanguard Investor Research and Insights team.
okay.
They've been tracking investor expectations since way back in 2017.
Wow.
And they do this by talking directly to investors.
Interesting. So they're not just, looking at Wall Street analysts and stuff.
Not just Wall Street, no. They
Yeah.
actually survey Main Street investors.
Wow. That's a really cool approach.
Yeah, they conduct these surveys every other month
Okay.
with a random sample of 2,000 Vanguard investors.
Wow.
And these are both personal investors and people with 401k plans.
Okay.
And they answer 13 short questions
Okay.
about what they expect from the U.S. stock market and economic growth.
That's fascinating. So it gives us a glimpse into what everyday investors are thinking.
Exactly. A real snapshot of what's going on.
So what did those surveys show us?
Yeah.
Did that, early 2020s doom and gloom stick around, or did things start looking up?
Let's just say things took a dramatic turn.
Oh.
For the better.
Okay.
In 2023 and 2024, we saw this major shift towards optimism.
Uh-huh.
The S&P 500 started hitting record highs.
Okay, give us some numbers. How much did the market actually increase?
So in 2023, the S&P 500 surged by 18%.
Wow.
And then in 2024, it jumped even higher by 24.3%.
Wow.
And even as we entered 2025,
Yeah.
that upward trend continued. The U.S. 500, the main U.S. stock market index, increased by 0.85%.
All since the beginning of the year. Those are impressive gains.
They are.
Was this just a fluke, though?
Right.
Can the market actually keep up this kind of growth?
Well, it's important to remember that historically the S&P 500 has seen these kinds of returns
No.
in certain years,
Mm-hmm.
returns over 20%. So while it's impressive,
Right.
it's not totally unheard of.
It's still within the realm of possibility.
Exactly. But what's really interesting is what actually drove this shift in sentiment.
Right. It's like night and day compared to those early pandemic years.
Yeah.
What flipped the script?
Yeah.
What were the key drivers that turned all that pessimism into this full-blown optimism party?
Well, there are a few key factors at play.
Okay.
First, the U.S. economy showed some incredible resilience. We saw strong growth
Yeah.
throughout 2023 and into 2024.
It's like the economy took a punch and bounced right back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's the inflation monster that everyone was terrified of in 2022.
Oh, yeah.
Remember those skyrocketing prices? Well,
Yeah.
the Federal Reserve really stepped in and managed to bring inflation down significantly.
Mm-hmm.
And that calmed a lot of nerves in the market.
That makes sense.
Mm,
Less inflation means more stability,
right.
which investors love.
Absolutely. And to give the economy an extra boost, the Federal Reserve started cutting interest rates in 2024.
Oh, okay.
It was like a shot of espresso straight to the heart of the market.
And investors responded enthusiastically, I'm sure.
They did. It was like a surge of confidence.
Yeah.
As those lower interest rates really helped stimulate economic growth.
It makes sense. But was it just the Fed that was driving all this optimism?
Not at all.
Okay.
We also saw companies, especially in the tech sector, posting some really strong earnings reports.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, those positive earnings were like a giant confidence booster for investors.
Like they saw those numbers and thought, okay, maybe things are going to be all right.
Exactly. And let's not forget about the reduction in uncertainty.
Yeah.
Remember all the chaos and unpredictability of the pandemic era?
Oh, yeah.
Well, with that mostly behind us. And inflation cooling down, investors could finally take a deep breath
Yeah.
and shift their focus to long-term growth.
So it sounds like a perfect storm of positive factors,
Yeah,
all happening at the same time.
exactly.
No wonder investor sentiment took such a sharp turn.
Right.
But wasn't there still some fear out there,
Of course.
even with all this good news?
Yeah, even with all the sunshine and rainbows, some investors stayed cautious.
Okay.
In fact, over half of the investors surveyed predicted a recession in 2024.
Wow. It's like that saying, bull markets climb a wall of worry.
Exactly.
Even with all this optimism,
Yeah.
there were still some valid concerns.
Right. Smart investors always consider all angles. They know the market is complex, and there are always potential risks lurking around the corner.
So we've got this interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
Optimism on one hand,
Mm-hmm.
concerns about a potential recession on the other.
Right.
So what were the experts saying about all this?
Right.
Were they bullish or bearish?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Okay, let's dive into the world of market analysts and financial gurus and see what they had to say.
Okay. I'm ready for those juicy expert opinions. Let's get into it.
All right, so some experts were fully on board with this wave of optimism.
Okay.
They pointed to those strong economic fundamentals we talked about, the resilient U.S. economy, declining inflation,
Yeah.
and those interest rate cuts by the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, okay.
They saw this as a sustainable trend, not just a temporary blip.
Okay, that's encouraging. But I'm guessing not everyone was quite so bullish.
You're right. Others were waving a yellow flag,
Oh.
warning about potential risks that could derail this happy train.
Uh-huh.
They pointed to things like geopolitical unrest.
Okay.
It's a major wild card.
Yeah.
They reminded everyone about the Gaza War and the Sudanese Civil War,
Yeah.
events that really sent shockwaves through the global economy.
Right. Those were definitely unsettling times. It reminds us that the world can change so quickly.
Exactly.
And even the most carefully laid plans.
Can get thrown off course. So how do we reconcile these conflicting viewpoints?
Yeah.
Is the market headed for more growth,
Right.
or are we on the brink of a correction?
Well, you have to remember that market sentiment isn't always a perfect reflection of what's actually happening in the economy.
Okay.
It's influenced by human psychology, news cycles,
Right?
and a whole bunch of other unpredictable factors.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like trying to predict the weather. There
Exactly.
are just so many variables.
So many.
So what does this all mean for our listeners?
Yeah.
As professional investors, how can we make smart decisions in this crazy landscape?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
The key takeaway here is that investor sentiment is a powerful force in the market.
Okay.
It might not always be logical,
I
but understanding how it works can give you a serious edge.
totally agree. It's about being informed and knowing how to interpret these shifts in sentiment.
Exactly. So the big question is, will this wave of optimism last? Or will those uncertainties we talked about drag us back down to earth? It's a question we can't answer for sure, but what we can do is, equip ourselves with the knowledge to, navigate this whole complex landscape.
Yeah, it's like a constant tug of war between those positive things that fuel the optimism
Uh-huh.
and then those uncertainties that could, bring us back to a more cautious mindset.
Right.
So how do we as professional investors stay ahead of the curve? What should we be watching for?
Well, one crucial area is economic data.
Okay.
We got to keep a close eye on things like GDP growth, inflation, employment figures.
Yeah, are we seeing continued expansion or is there like a slowdown happening?
Exactly. And is inflation really under control, or are those prices going to start creeping back up?
Right. It's like checking the vital signs of the market.
Exactly. Making sure everything's working the way it should.
Yeah.
Another critical piece is corporate earnings.
Okay.
Are companies still making good profits? Are they meeting or exceeding those analysts' expectations? Those earnings reports give us a peek into the financial health of these companies and can signal broader trends in the market.
It's amazing how every piece of data kind of adds to the bigger picture.
It does.
But what about those unpredictable things that can really shake things up?
Yeah.
Like geopolitics.
Absolutely. Geopolitical events can have a huge impact on market sentiment and how investors behave.
Yeah.
Remember those shockwaves we talked about from the Gaza War and the Sudanese Civil War?
Yeah.
Those were stark reminders that global events can really change things quickly and introduce a whole lot of new uncertainty.
It's a lot to keep track of.
It is.
But I think you've given our listeners some really good starting points for understanding, how to interpret those forces that shape investor sentiment.
That's the key. Staying informed. The more you understand how these factors work together, the better prepared you'll be to make those informed decisions.
Regardless of, what the market does.
Exactly.
So to sum it all up, what's the bottom line for our listeners? What's the big takeaway from all this?
Well, we've seen this amazing shift from deep pessimism in the early 2020s to this wave of optimism that swept through 2023 and 2024.
It's been quite a ride.
It has, and that shift was driven by a bunch of positive factors. A resilient U.S. economy, a big decline in inflation, and those proactive interest rate cuts from the Fed.
Yeah, it feels like we're still on that roller coaster.
We are. The future's still unwritten. There are plenty of twists and turns ahead.
So will this optimism stick around?
Right.
Or will those uncertainties bring us back down to earth?
That's the question, isn't it? Only time will tell.
It's what keeps us on the edge of our seats. That's what makes the market so dynamic and so captivating.
Right.
It's this constantly evolving system that keeps us engaged and challenged.
For sure.
And that's exactly why we do Market Dive, to
Yeah.
help you navigate all this complexity and, make sense of it all.
Make sense of it all.
And remember, we've only just scratched the surface here. There's a whole lot more to uncover.
Oh, yeah. We encourage you to check out the full source material. We've got links for you in the show notes.
All those reports, articles, expert opinions we talked about,
Mm-hmm.
you can delve deeper into this fascinating topic and, continue your own exploration.
Keep learning.
But before we let you go,
Yeah.
we want to leave you with one final thought-provoking question.
Okay.
We've talked about understanding, the past and present of U.S. investor sentiment.
Uh-huh.
But what about the future?
Right.
What are those potential game changers, those unexpected trends that could completely reshape investor sentiment in the years to come?
That's a great question.
We've touched on economic factors, political events, corporate performance.
Mm-hmm.
But what about technology? How might things like artificial intelligence, blockchain, the metaverse, impact investor sentiment and reshape how we see risk and reward?
That's a really interesting question.
It is.
And it's one we'll definitely explore in future episodes.
But be sure to subscribe to Market Dive and join us as we, continue to unravel the mysteries of the financial world.
Absolutely.
Until next time, happy investing.
Yeah, those emerging technologies, AI, blockchain, the metaverse.
Yeah.
They feel like uncharted territory even for, experienced investors.
They do. And that's what makes them so interesting.
Yeah.
They could disrupt whole industries, create brand new investment opportunities,
Mm-hmm.
and really change how we think about risk and reward in the market.
Yeah, it's like a whole new world of investment possibilities is opening up.
It really is. And that's why it's so important to approach investing with a mix of knowledge and curiosity.
Right.
Don't just follow the crowd or the headlines.
Okay.
You got to dig deeper, question assumptions, and always be on the lookout for those emerging trends
Yeah.
that could reshape the whole investment landscape.
That's a great point. It's not just about having the information, it's about understanding it. Connecting the dots and seeing the bigger picture.
Right. And that's what we've tried to do in this deep dive into U.S. investor sentiment.
We've explored the history, looked at what drives those big shifts in sentiment, and considered those wild card events that could shake things up in the future.
We've covered a lot of ground, but as always, there's still so much more to learn.
Absolutely. We encourage you to keep exploring this. Dive into those source materials we linked in the show notes.
Okay.
Follow those market analysts and financial gurus, and just keep that curiosity alive.
Yeah.
The more you learn and understand, the more confident and informed you'll be as an investor.
So to wrap things up, what's the key message we want our listeners to take away from this deep dive?
We want you to remember that investor sentiment is powerful, and it's always changing. By understanding what influences it, the economic data, the corporate earnings, the geopolitical events, and even those emerging technologies, you can gain a real advantage in the market.
It's about staying informed, being adaptable, and never losing sight of the bigger picture.
Exactly.
Well, we hope this deep dive has given you the insights and knowledge you need to navigate this complex world of investing.
We hope so.
Until next time on Market Dive, happy investing.